Hey guys, welcome back to Chariot Palmistry. This video is the second video in a series that I'm calling the most important video series I'm ever going to make. If you haven't seen the last video, I suggest that you go watch that now to understand what we're talking about in this video. But the general gist of it all is that the information age started around about 30 years ago. And as a result of that, the previous age of humanity, the industrial age, is in decline. And as the industrial age declines and destroys itself, it will destroy a lot of society and the foundations of society that were built upon the industrial age. It will also destroy a lot of people around us too. So what I want to do in this video is give you guys the tools to navigate this whole chaos. At Chariot Palmistry, our tagline is that we help you navigate your life. So it's not enough for me to say that the world is falling apart as it rebuilds itself and recreates itself. I want to show you guys how to navigate that chaos. What we're going to be focusing primarily in this video is on the 4 kinds of energy that translate into the 4 kinds of wealth. That is your health, your family, your monetary wealth, and your spirit or your soul. So I'll be going through a whole series of slides in this video that help you build and preserve these elements as the industrial age continues its decline. So the first thing, or the most important aspect of your wealth, is your health. It's the greatest part of your whole life. Without your health, you really have nothing else, if you guys follow that cliche. Now, the general gist of how to approach your health in this new age is to follow the information age tools that improve your health and rely less on industrial age tools that do so. Remember in the last video how we said the healthcare system that we've got in place right now is one that's been designed by sociopaths? It's designed more or less to extract every dollar from you without actually healing you, to keep you alive just long enough that they can make themselves rich. Well, that's not going to continue in the information age. Look at doctors and hospitals as more or less an industrial age solution to healthcare. You're like a widget in a larger assembly line. You come into the hospital, they suppress your symptoms and send you home. Then when you get sick again, you go back to the hospital and you're in that loop pretty much until you run out of money. When you run out of money, then they tell you they can't help you anymore. The information age healthcare though is going to be focused more on prevention. And this is a tag that's used in medical circles mostly right now, that an ounce of prevention, I think the saying is an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure, right? They've been saying it for a long time, but we haven't really had the tools or the technology in which to implement prevention or even how to measure it. It's all well and good to eat healthy today, but we don't know how that will impact your health 20 or 30 years from now. Very soon the technology tools will be developed that we will be able to start to do that. Now, the information tools that have already been built have actually already started to increase human lifespan and quality of life. If you have a smartwatch, for example, that little tech or gizmo is a literal game changer for a lot of people's health. You can predict the probability of heart attacks or heart disease decades before they start up. So this is only just one example. There's going to be newer gadgets that come along in the years ahead, and it will continue to improve and increase the quality of life that people are going to have. So the first step here is stop thinking of health in terms of the industrial age. Think in terms of health in terms of the information age. That means start using a lot of these tech tools that are coming out and rely less on the traditional insurance/healthcare system. Now, actually the other thing I should say is already based on the technology of today, scientists and clinicians are starting to estimate that our children's generation, the millennials, will most likely live up to 160 years of age. Let me explain what I mean by this. So firstly, when that generation gets to the age of 160, they're not going to be old and frail. They'll have a fair bit of vitality about them. So think of it this way. The World War II generation, their average life expectancy was about 60 years. The baby boomers, their life expectancy is about 80 years. And the Gen X, Gen Y people, their life expectancy is about 100 years. So there's been a steady increase in the quality of life, or at least in the number of years that people live. But the baby boomers, when they get to 80, they had the vitality of their parents' generation when they reach 60. And the Gen X, Gen Y people, when they get to 100, they'll have the vitality of a modern 80-year-old. Similarly, when these millennials get to the age of 160, they'll have the vitality of an 80-year-old today. So they'll be able to do pretty well. But not only will they be healthier, they're actually going to be smarter as well. And I want you to think very closely about this. The analogy I'll put out is that of Einstein's neural network. Einstein is the poster child for genius. Anyone who thinks about the smartest or one of the most influential thinkers really of the last 100 years, or if they had to make a list of those people, Einstein would be in that list or in the top 10 for most, right? The amazing thing about Einstein, not only was he born intelligent, but he started studying physics relatively late in his teenage years. I think in probably 18 or 19. And he passed away at the age of 74. So that means he spent just on 55 to 60 years studying physics and examining it from lots of different aspects. Now think of what 60 years of dedicated effort does towards building a neural network in your brain. See, the more you think about a problem, the more you build your neural network. If you spend a decade focused in on a single problem, you put in those proverbial 10,000 hours, that builds a very strong neural network. Einstein put in nearly 6 decades dedicated to solving physics problems. That's why people considered him a genius, because it would have been more or less 60,000 hours that he spent on physics. But his generation only lived up to the age of 60. And he was, let's call him a freak in the sense that he lived up to the age of 74. So he lived about 14 years longer than most people, which meant his neural network expanded longer than most people. In other words, living longer makes you smarter. In the future, when everyone gets to the age of about 160, everyone will have a neural network larger than Albert Einstein's. If you start your profession at the age of 20, then you keep working at it for, let's say, the next 100 years, then you'll have a neural network literally twice as big, or actually I'll rephrase that, you would have spent twice as much time building your neural network than Einstein did. These things, they grow exponentially, so it's not just you're twice as smart or twice as intelligent at processing information than Einstein, it's more like you'll be 4 times more intelligent and better than him. In other words, society, I believe, will improve exponentially because of this. Imagine living in a world in which everybody has a neural network as switched on and as sharp as Einstein's, if not better. And also think about the improvement in society that we've had right now, as average life expectancy has gone from 60 to 80 years. Right? It's just this last generation or two where we've put a man on the moon, invented the internet, built AI and all of that. That's just a 20-year increase in life expectancy. Now imagine how much better society is going to be when we increase it from 80 years of age up to 160. Everybody will be a super genius in the future, and they'll be incredibly healthy too. Now remember, Jupiter is going to rule the information age. And what that means is that the smartest and most intelligent people will be the ones who are the most successful in this coming age. It's not going to be the sociopaths anymore. So what that means is your first action step for you and your children is to start to fix your brain. And the superpower, or the means by which you achieve that superpower, is through meditation. In previous generations, the smartest people were the ones who could memorize and retain information. But that's a redundant way of thinking right now, because the internet actually gives you access to all of human knowledge. So the leaders of tomorrow aren't going to be the people who can retrieve that information. They're going to be the people who can process and build upon that knowledge. Right now, a lot of people are thinking that AI is going to take over that function, but AI can only do so much, at least for the moment. The best leaders of the future are going to be the ones who meditate. So if you want to have that step up above everyone else, you want to meditate, you want to be giving your kids the same advice. So that's the first thing I'll say. Health is automatically going to get better for everybody. We'll be starting to live longer, we'll be hopefully smarter as well if that prediction comes out. The next area of wealth that you guys ought to focus on is your family and also your community. Now, to explain this, let me explain the general dynamic of what's happening with Rahu's influence on society right now. What you'll notice is that the industrial age actually destroyed the family unit, especially in most Western countries. Now, in this era, it's normal for the young people to move away from their family and their hometown to find a better job and better prospects elsewhere, including other countries. This is very unusual because for most of humanity's history, people have lived more or less in the same town or in the same region that they were born in. Same with their children and their children's children and so on. This trend only started to change during the industrial age, and it got really out of control over the last 20 or 30 years as Rahu took over the industrial age and as the information age started up. During this time, you're also going to notice that the elderly were put into retirement homes when they couldn't contribute financially anymore, especially in the Western countries. Once upon a time, when someone got old in the West, their children would look after them. But that's not the case anymore. So the family unit is actually falling apart. And it's the industrial age that destroyed the family unit. See, in the Dark Ages and before that period, people were pretty much entirely dependent on the family unit. I say the Dark Ages because most people assume that's an era of ignorance. It's not really that's the case. Even if you go back to the Bronze Age, people looked after and supported their family. In the Industrial Age, it made people dependent on their employers. So once upon a time, you'd be loyal to your mum and dad and your brothers and sisters. Now people are starting to become dependent on their employers. Rahu has made them dependent now on their governments. So think of it this way, right? If you're born, actually the second you're born, you have to get a birth certificate. You've got to register your existence with your government. Then you go to a government school through most of your childhood. Then you get a job and you start paying taxes to the government. And some or a lot of people start receiving welfare from the government. Then when you die, you've got to register your death with the government too. Everything is dependent on the government. Whereas previously, everyone was dependent on their family and their family unit. So think about it this way. Governments, more correctly the sociopaths who run them, are actually in control of your family. And you don't want that. As I said in the previous video, the sociopaths who rule the world are actually going to be eliminated from the very top echelons of society. This whole thing is going to get shaken up and reset. In the information age, that era is going to actually unite families and communities once again. We're already starting to see this trend, although it's in a very small scale at this point. Think of after COVID, how people started to work from home again. People actually started thinking about a work-life balance, believe it or not. Before that point, a lot of people, a lot of professionals at least, were willing to work 12 hours a day, just slaving away for their corporate bosses, more or less. Right now, that trend is starting to change. And as this trend continues, you're going to notice more and more people focusing on a work-life balance. As that happens, that will start to unite their families. But it's technology and information age technology that's starting to create this. In fact, look at the echo chamber that you're on through your social media, and you'll notice that it's already starting to build some online communities. And a lot of people, the echo chambers they're caught in, are actually still self-destructive at this stage. That's mostly because their echo chambers is still dominated and monitored by sociopaths. As I said, they're going to go away in the future. And this is something that's going to improve the information age over time. It's going to be a new way of thinking, and the family unit is going to be at the core of it. So let me discuss 3 different philosophies here: collectivism, individualism, and then unity. So collectivism is basically the idea that an individual, actually the needs of a community, are greater than the needs of an individual. This is how most people used to think throughout most of human history. Then in the industrial age, the idea of individualism was created, in which the needs of an individual is greater than the needs of their community. Today, most of the world has a collectivism type of mindset, like most of Asia, Africa, South America, and the overwhelming majority of the world. Mostly it's the Western countries, Europe and North America, and the Anglo-Saxon societies, that are individualistic. So, for example, in America, you could theoretically burn the American flag in the middle of a busy street. You can't get into trouble for that because the individual's rights are greater than the rights of everyone else. Whereas if you burn the flag of your country in, let's say, Saudi Arabia, you get into a lot of trouble for that because they believe the needs of the majority outweigh the needs of the individual. This is more or less the sociological conflict that the world's been caught up in really for about the last century or so. And just as we were starting to figure that one out, a new philosophy, I think, is going to start to emerge that will overtake both of these. That philosophy, I think, is unity, which is actually the mystics' philosophy. Unity isn't interested in the needs of the individual or the needs of the collective. It sees everybody as really the same thing, or the same person and the same entity. So what you're going to notice in the future, people will actually start to behave as if they're integrated into everyone else's community. And it's not so much a matter of their needs being better than someone else's or vice versa. Everyone is the same. You know what I was saying before about sociopaths ruling the world? Sociopaths are the ultimate individualists. They only care about themselves and not the world around them. So if their society is being destroyed, then what's left over is everyone actually starting to get along with each other. So your goal and mission during this period is to build and develop your family, but also to build and develop your friends and your community too. In the next few slides, I'm going to show you exactly how to do that, how to figure out who your friends in your community are as well. But in the meantime, understand that this means prioritizing time with them, your friends and your family, and also finding ways to help them grow and develop. Now, this may sound like something that's easy to do, but you've probably been raised with industrial age thinking and also individualistic thinking as well. So doing this is going to challenge a lot of your ideals. So let's talk about how to find and build your community. Remember we were saying in the last video how there are 4 kinds of energy, based off the 4 fingers. They correlate to basically the 4 kinds of people. There are people who talk about ideas. They more or less run off the energy of Jupiter. There are people who talk about emotions, and they run off the energy of the sun. There are people who talk about things. They run off the energy of Mercury. Then there are people who talk about other people. They run off the energy of Saturn. And just as the yugas or the seasons go from top to bottom, meaning the ideal time, the less ideal time, less and less ideal, that's how the energy with these 4 groups of people go. Generally, it's the ideas people who grow and succeed over a period of time, whilst it's the Sun and Mercury people, those who talk about emotions and things, who stay stuck exactly where they are, generation after generation. And then it's the Saturn people, those who talk about other people, who actually go backwards in life. So one thing I want you to notice is for the next maybe couple weeks, I want you to sit and listen to I'll rephrase that. For the next couple of weeks, I want you guys to sit and listen to your friends when they speak. Are you involved in a group that talks about ideas and building their future? Or are you involved in a group that talks about their material possessions? Or, in a worst case scenario, are you involved in a group that talks about other people? If you're in that latter group, I can almost certainly guarantee that that community or that group of friends will destroy itself in the next few years. Whereas if you're involved in a group that talks about ideas, that's a group I can almost certainly guarantee will grow and flourish over the next few years. In fact, the most successful community in the coming years across the world will be those people who talk about ideas. Everyone else is going to suffer. So your homework then is to find a group of friends who discuss ideas rather than gossip about other people or show off their material possessions. You should also look for friends who are looking to build their future, people who are adaptable and trying to become self-sufficient. And that's just the common sense stuff. People who meditate, exercise, and eat healthy food. So it's amazing that anyone who does these three things, you'll notice their life gets better and better year after year. Those are the people you want in your orbit, especially in these times of chaos that we've got coming ahead of us. Now, you guys may be thinking, but what if I'm stuck with a group of friends who all they do is gossip about each other? I'm not saying you got to get rid of those lifelong friendships if that's what you've got. What I'm saying here is you've got to find a way to redirect their energy so that you're not getting dragged down with them. Try and change the topic to talk about ideas and see how they respond. All right, I'm hoping that makes sense. This is a really important aspect for your future. Now, that's one area on how to identify which community you should be a part of and how to join a new community. The part B to all of this is how to set your family up for the information age. This means you need to start thinking in terms of generations now. In the last few generations, people more or less just thought about themselves, their immediate needs, and how to look after, at most, maybe the kids' generation. Very few people had that long-term thinking, where they were thinking 200 or 300 years ahead. Because of all the social and political chaos that's been going on in the world for the last century, probably didn't pay to think long term. But as I've explained before, that chaos period is going to end in probably as little as 15 years from now. Well, actually, let's put 20 years just to give it a slightly higher margin. After that point, the world becomes incredibly stable and you can actually plan the long term for your family again. So the first thing I want to do is get you guys to start thinking in terms of centuries ahead. Decide where you want to live for the next few generations, not just right now. Okay? In the next couple of slides, I'm going to run through a series of different countries and how I think they're going to be successful or unsuccessful in the years to come, to give you guys an idea on how to analyze if you're in a good country or not. But in a general sense, let's just say that you want to live in a country that is growing and developing its information age infrastructure. You don't want to be living in a country that's dependent on industrial age infrastructure. Because if the industrial age is declining, then that society is going to decline. If the information age is going to take over, or if you believe that will happen, then that society will succeed. So for example, in the industrial age, you wanted to live in an industrialized economy, such as England and most of Europe, but also as well as the US. These places did incredibly well in the industrial age. But in the information age, you should try to live in a country that conforms to information age principles. These are places where universities have incubator systems where they try and grow tech. These should be places that have a lot of patents being registered, or countries that develop a lot of their internet infrastructure and technology infrastructure. You basically want to be living in a startup capitalist dream country. So right now the world is caught up between two worlds, economists think we're caught up in two worlds, namely the developed economies and the underdeveloped economies. And they're more or less saying that the developed world or the developed economies are going to start to grow in the next few years, and how that's going to change the world. But I think this is the wrong debate. You see, that whole idea of the developed world and underdeveloped world, that came out of Cold War lexicon. It used to be the first world, which was US and its allies, the second world, which was the Soviet Union and its allies, then the third world, which was everybody else, basically people who lived in poverty. But the world isn't an industrialized hellhole anymore. Again, think of the Cold War as a philosophy. It was basically capitalism versus socialism. Capitalism is all about money and how to make it. Socialism is all about money and how to redistribute it. So they're both actually about money, which is industrial age thinking. The future isn't going to be about money anymore. It's going to be about ideas and knowledge. So you want to live in the country that is developing new ideas and new branches of knowledge. So I'm going to share some examples on how to analyze the country and give you insight. Well, actually, as I do this, it's going to give you insights into the elections that are due to take place all over the world in the next decade or two. You're going to start to understand the real issues that are facing each country and start to see through the BS or nonsense that a lot of politicians will try and put your people through. So the first country I want to talk about is America. This is going to be probably one of the most successful countries in the information age, because America actually started the information age. But they're also one of the most powerful industrial countries at the end of the industrial age too. So America is an industrial economy. Oh, actually, I'll rephrase that. The American industrial economy is in decline. Whilst during this time there's a parallel economy, the information age economy, and that's actually booming. So what's happening right now is that these two are actually cancelling each other out. The decline of industrial America is being offset by the rise of information age America. And it's happening at such an even pace that no one can really see this trend. A lot of economists are saying that wages have been stagnant since the 80s. But this isn't actually true, because it's the industrial age jobs who's got wages that are stagnant, whereas the tech and IT jobs that are actually booming. In the last video I told you guys that I used to live in America in the mid-90s. My father was a computer contractor over there. I was a teenager at that point. He was earning, I think from memory, around about $120,000 per year at that point in time. If he were to take a similar job in America, I mean, he's retired now, but if someone else wanted a similar job in America, they'd be getting between $250,000 to $300,000 per year now. And so that skill set has gone up in price and value over time. Whereas if he were an accountant in America in the mid-90s, his income would be maybe 20 to 50% higher right now. So look at America through that lens, that there's a stagnant or declining industrial age going on, whilst the information age is actually booming. So there's two very distinct Americas, and I believe that these two Americas are going to fight themselves and almost destroy themselves on the path towards building a magnificent society. The future of America is really, really good. But also looking at America through this lens and all the internal strife that's going on in that country right now, you'll notice that everything starts to make sense. Don't focus on Republican versus Democrat issues. Think of it in terms of industrial age versus information age issues. A few years ago when Trump ran for election, he was going after the industrial age voters. The people who are stereotypically looked down upon, the uneducated, so-called rednecks. They actually won, and Trump promised to save their jobs and build a wall and do all the stuff that they wanted to hear. None of those policies are actually going to stop the decline of the industrial age. The information age is going to take it over. Now, if you look at America through that lens, understand that America is actually a victim of its own genius and success. That's why I'm confident that America is going to be one of the booming countries in the world for many years to come, after they clean up their mess from their successes in the industrial age. A lot of people are looking at America as if it's a broken empire, like the British, like the Romans, or many others. I don't think that's the case. I think America is going to be incredibly good in the future. Just as a throwaway line as well, I'll also make the prediction that the first Gen X president that America has is going to be a phenomenal leader. Someone of the caliber of like a JFK or someone like that. All right, so that's one country I want you guys to have a look at. Another country, perhaps it gives a slightly different way on how to analyze successful countries in the age to come, is India. Now, I'm on the record as predicting that India has entered its next golden age, and it did that about a year or two ago. Now, just some context on this, Indian history as we know it today goes back about 5,000 years ago. That's when the Bronze Age in India started and the Indus Valley civilization happened. And between then and now, India's gone through 5 golden ages already. And during that time, it's also had 5 societal declines as well. So Indians know a thing or two about rebuilding a great society. And I'm confident they're doing this right now. The problem, though, is that most of India's ancient knowledge has already been destroyed. Now, I'll give you an example of this. A few years ago, I wrote a book called The Dictionary of Indian Palmistry Symbols. And I went through a whole bunch of old palmistry books, manuscripts, and so on. I was only able to collect about 80 unique palmistry symbols. And those ancient manuscripts that I looked at, they referred to or referenced 1008 original symbols. Of those 1008, most of them have become extinct or lost. Their knowledge has been lost over time, and only 80 exist. That's why I wanted to write that book at that point in time, because if someone didn't do it, then the remaining 80 might have been lost. What this means is that 92% of that knowledge base has actually been destroyed. And that's a conservative estimate, because I also believe that 99% of palmistry has been destroyed. What we know today is only 1% of it. And same with astrology, 99% of that has already been destroyed. 99% of Indian mathematics, Indian Ayurvedic medicine, Indian yoga, basically the best things about India, over 99% of that has all been destroyed. And I want you to compare this to the other great civilizations of the ancient world. Think of ancient Egypt, 100% of that society has been destroyed. And what I mean by that is the lineage from teacher to student was destroyed many centuries ago. First the Christians came in and destroyed most of it, and what was left was destroyed by the Muslims, and the little bit that was left was destroyed by the Europeans. The only reason we know that the little that we know about Egypt today comes mostly from academics, people studying translated texts and so on. That teacher-student lineage is completely gone and no one knows about it. The same thing has happened in Samaria. 100% of their culture has been completely destroyed. Similarly, first by the Christians, then by the Muslims, then by the European industrialists. There's almost nothing that we know about them beyond academic, archaeological rediscoveries. A similar thing has taken place in China. However, with China, they've at least managed to save about 1% of their society too. Again, between Genghis Khan's destruction, the Europeans, and so on. And also, you got to say the Chinese themselves, they've destroyed the overwhelming majority of their culture. The little that survives actually survives outside of China. The Greeks were very similar too. I think at one point in time they were probably down to 99.9% of their complete society being destroyed too. Between Christian fundamentalists, between Muslims and like the Ottoman Empire and what have you. The only reason we know a lot of the great Greek philosophies and stories is because they were preserved in Baghdad. They actually traveled back into Europe during the Crusader period, or in the century or two in its aftermath. But anyway, I could talk for hours and hours about the history of those great cultures. The point I'm trying to make, though, is that India is actually rebuilding its ancient information. And as a result of this, it's going to start to become a world leader very soon. There's a revolution taking place within India's education sector right now, where kids are being taught yogic meditation. And this new generation of Indians are becoming very, very intelligent. Remember I was saying a few slides ago, the most successful leaders of tomorrow are going to be the ones who can process information, meaning the people who meditate. All the Indian kids are starting to be taught that right now. Now, if you combine that intelligence with just how hardworking Indians are generally anyway, you've got the template for a great society. All they need to do is just get their industrial age people out of the way so that they can actually start building it. And not only that, but Indians are also rebuilding future tech too. There's a whole new generation of Indians that are building the new world with tech startups and innovation. Now, I don't just mean they're copying the innovation that's coming out of the US, they're actually building upon it. So India's already taking over as the energetic center of the world, and it's one reason on this channel that we've been able to predict a lot of wars and conflicts relative to India. So we can say, for example, the next war will be to the southwest of India or to the southeast and so on. It used to be that you could only say that about America, but the energy has already shifted. But this decline in India, it's not going to be easy. The decline of the industrial age in India is not going to be easy. It's actually going to be more destructive than the US. You see, the US is caught up in two ages, the industrial age and the information age, whereas India is caught up between three ages. The Dark Ages, there's a lot of Indians living in the Dark Ages, even today, the industrial age, and also the information age. Now, the Dark Ages with India started pretty much when the British came in. Though I suppose technically you could say it started a few centuries before that when the Mughals came in. But the British, they really leveled down India to a large degree. And there's literally hundreds of millions of people today living in the Dark Ages in India. Its industrial age only started about 80 years ago after Gandhiism and the British were forced to leave. India started to redevelop its industry and its industrial age infrastructure. During this time, the information age is only taking over too. So if you see India through this lens, that's only had an 80-year industrial age, that means that there's a lot of destruction that needs to take place within India. 2/3 of its society needs to be destroyed. And that's not a good thing, considering that there's 1.4 billion people within that country. Now, remember I was saying in the last video how, according to mainstream Hindu thought, India is in its Kal Yuga, or in its Dark Ages. I think we're just starting to come out of that Dark Age right now. If you look at the growth and the rapid advances happening in India right now, you can't say that we're stuck in an era of ignorance. Things are actually getting better. The problem with India, though, is that they have a very dysfunctional political system with both corruption and incompetence. Now, all politicians everywhere are both corrupt and incompetent, but in India, they just take it to a whole other level here. Some Indian politicians today, they want to industrialize their economy, more or less follow in China's footsteps. They see China as the best template for a growing economy. But this is wrong. You don't want to industrialize at the end of the industrial age. You want to build information age infrastructure at the start of the information age. It's like building stone tools during the Bronze Age. The technology is just redundant and it doesn't actually benefit anyone. So because India didn't completely industrialize, they're going to have less destruction in their society, in the industrial sector of their society, as the industrial age finishes. They'll actually have a greater benefit as the information age moves along. So understand, there are actually 3 Indias right now, just as there are 2 Americas. And the Indians still living in the Dark Ages, their way of life is going to be destroyed, along with the industrialists of India. This is the poor and the rich of the country. Then they will be replaced by forward-thinking, dharmic Indians who will lead the world into a new age. So that's the good and the bad news. The really terrifying news about India is that it's a country that has exceeded its Malthusian limits. Now, a Malthusian limit, just as an oversimplification of that term, it's basically the number of people who can live in an area based off the food that it produces. So look at India as a country that's about, I don't know, 1/4 to 1/3 the size of the United States. And it has a population of 1.4 billion people. India can't produce enough food on its own to feed all those hungry mouths, which means India has to import food from other countries. If for whatever reason that isn't happening in the future, there'll be a lot of hungry Indians. So expect to see one of three things in India's future. Option A, the most probable outcome, is lots of people dying. I say it's the most probable outcome because it's the path of least resistance. It's not something that anyone should want because it's literally hundreds of millions of people dying. Option B, the preferable option, is that lots of people are becoming educated and lifted out of the Dark Ages and the Industrial Age. This is what I hope will happen, but something that takes a long, long time to take place. I mean, literally decade or two for kids to go through the education system. And then the third option for India with this mix of chaos is there could also be a lot of people just naturally emigrating out of India. This has been going on for the last few decades, but who knows how much longer that's going to go on. So the basic gist of all of this is to see that India is actually going to become one of the most successful countries in the world very, very soon. They're going to be going through some terrible growing pains. Right, so that's one country. Have a look at China as sort of a parallel to India. You know how India is a country going through three ages all at the same time? China is kind of the same way. But it's also a very big unknown variable. And when I say it's an unknown variable, I mean that it's about 1/6 of the world's population. So a really, really big unknown variable. See, China, they rapidly industrialized at the end of the Industrial Age. You know, communism was all about industrialization against their own traditions, and then more recently the, what did they call it? Capitalism with Chinese characteristics. The modern economic system in China, that's about even more rapid industrialization. As this happens, what you'll notice is that China isn't actually developing any significant information age infrastructure. They've got all their eggs in the industrialization basket. So their tech companies are more likely to steal tech IP than they are to develop it indigenously. And this is why China is such a big unknown variable. You see, they should be one of the leading countries in the world, not only because of their ancient traditions. You know, like India, they're many thousands of years old. They've gone through golden ages and declines just like India, China, and Samaria. But they're not developing themselves for this coming information age. And that's how we can make a prediction that China may not actually be one of the leaders in the world in the future. You see, China has actually destroyed most of their traditions in favor of industrialization. This means that the industrial age foundations of their society must be destroyed as we move deeper and deeper into the information age. This destruction will cause chaos, actually cause more and more chaos in China than in India. This is because China has a better industrial base than India does. And it will also be more destructive than America because America has information age infrastructure that can replace or balance out their industrial age destruction. China basically doesn't have America's tech foundation at all. So I'm also not confident that they've got the information age principles to replace it. That's why China is such a big unknown. They're historically one of the most brilliant people in the world. They can adapt and pivot their society with only a few decades. You know, they've shown the world time and time again. The question is, will they be able to pivot with the decline of the industrial age? I don't think they can, but I don't want to predict that China is going to collapse or fall apart. All we can hope is China does well, because what's good for China is good for the world. The next country I want to cover is Germany. This is a country I'm very, very optimistic on. In fact, Germany is probably going to be the best country in the world to live in after the US and India. And its near neighbors will actually benefit with Germany's rise just because of the EU. Now think of how America's rise in the industrial age was great for its allies. It's going to be the same for Germany and the EU generally as well. Now, unlike America or India or China, which have varying degrees of industry, information age, and dark ages going on in their communities, the reason I'm so optimistic about Germany is because they have a brilliant education system. And their education system produces brilliant thinkers. Remember that the information age will be ruled by Jupiterian teachers. So the smartest people in the world will be the ones that come out of the best education systems. Think about it this way. It was Germany that resurrected India's knowledge base. During the colonial era, the British sent their soldiers, their priests, and even their business people into India to trade, steal, and pillage. But the Germans sent their scholars to India. And a lot of the ancient German texts were translated first from their Sanskrit into German. From German, they were translated into other European languages, such as English. From English, those stories and those texts made their way back to India. So the European Enlightenment, which is an era of philosophy, it actually started in Germany with thinkers like Kant and Schopenhauer, and they started up their works, which were very similar to ancient Indian works, but they did so in the decades after books like the Bhagavad Gita were translated into German. The Germans, they produced some of the best thinkers as a result of this over the 18th, 19th, and 20th centuries, from philosophers, scientists, musicians, and artists. If you think about Hitler and the whole Nazi ideology, he thought the Germans were superior to other people, but he thought it had something to do with race. Now, obviously, he was wrong about that, but it was the German education system and the thinkers that it produced, which is what actually made him really special. The even more remarkable thing about Germany is if you consider how disastrous the 20th century was for them. They fought the First World War, they fought the Second World War, their country was partitioned between East and West Germany, and then when it was reunified, they had to hold up the EU economically. That's more in recent decades. Despite all of this chaos, they somehow were still able to keep their education and philosophical systems intact. They're also a very forward-thinking liberal society too. And this is why I'm confident that Germany should actually do very, very well in the information age. In fact, if you look at Germany and how it's been supporting the EU, especially during the European bond crisis, you'll see that they're actually keeping the bubble, the industrial age deflation, from popping too badly. They're actually supporting the EU more than they're being supported by them. That's a whole other political thing I just don't even want to get to. But the key takeaway here is Germany's going to be great in the future. The only caveat I'd put on this is on the influence of the EU, depending on how strong that institution gets. See, the Germans, they're not really Germans anymore. They're citizens of a larger Europe or larger European culture. So what I want you to do is keep an eye on the German education system, more or less for the sake of the world. The better it is, the better humanity gets. The other country I want to talk about is Australia. This is a country I'm very, very, very biased in favor of, just like I'm very biased in favor of India. I'm very biased in favor of the US, all countries I've lived in and I call home. Now, the cool thing about Australia is it's a Western democracy that never really industrialized. So it's really a blank slate with which to build a real society without any serious destruction. You see, India, actually you look at America, a similar democracy, they've got a lot of industrial base that has to be destroyed and a good information base that has to be built and grown up. Australia just has its information age base. The industrial base never really existed. So that's why there's going to be less destruction taking place in Australia in the years to come. The other thing is that Australia is nowhere near its Malthusian limit. You know how in India we can predict that there'll be a lot of deaths or a massive decline in its population in the future. Australia is about 2 or 3 times as big as India, and it's only got a population of 25 million. And not only that, have a look at Australia's education system. What you'll notice is Australia has contributed a disproportionate amount to the information age so far. In fact, think of any industry and you're going to notice that there's a handful of Aussies near the top of it. That's the industrial age or the information age. You know how most people are paranoid that the Jews are taking over the world, or it's the Chinese, or it's the Indians? The Aussies need to be in that group as well. So it's a handful of Aussies, along with the Chinese, the Jews, and the Indians, who hyper-perform and do well in every industry. The Australians basically invented Wi-Fi, which I'm very confident you guys are probably listening to this video on a Wi-Fi network. For such a small population, we've also invented the ultrasound, the bionic ear, even the refrigerator. Now, the reason I mentioned the refrigerator, if you look at inventions that increase human populations, it's got to be the ones that produce more food or preserve it the longest. So the refrigerator, the microwave, even the oven, even fire, all of these breakthroughs, technological breakthroughs, increase human lifespan and the number of people. So Australia is basically one of the few countries in the world that's not close to its Malthusian limit. The country has plenty of room to grow. Now, the only problem with Australia is it's a very laid-back society. We just don't have that fire in our belly the way that Indians or Americans do. And maybe the chaos in the coming years will remedy this, but keep in mind that Aussies are a very tough and resilient people too. Now, where I'm going with this is you want to live in a country that has good information age infrastructure. I've given you a couple examples here, the countries that have to fall apart to some degree, the countries that have to rebuild themselves to some degree, the countries with great education systems, and the blank slate countries. I want to talk a little bit about where not to live in the information age. You see, you want to live in an information age country and you want to move out of a country that has only industrial age capabilities. And Saudi Arabia is probably the poster child for this one. See, Saudi Arabia is an oil-dependent economy. This is great in the industrial age when everyone needs cheap energy, but it's not great in the information age. See, what's happening right now is the Saudis have seen the writing on the wall and that people are going to stop buying oil, at least in the quantities that they used to. So they're trying to pivot their economy into more of like a finance-based economy and a tourism-based economy. But neither of these two things are useful in the information age, which means Saudi Arabia must pivot again, and they have to do so immediately or else the whole society will collapse. Now, that's a prediction I'm going to make, but consider what that's going to do to the balance of power in the Middle East in the years ahead. So your homework right now is to create that future for the next generation. Find a country that has information age capabilities, because these countries are the ones that will thrive for the next few decades and centuries. You also want to leave a country that is dependent on the industrial age. And also have a look at the education systems of each of these countries. Very simply, if you want to know what the future of a country is going to be like, look at the minds of its children. And then you want to settle in those countries between 2026 to 2043. Okay, so I'm going to end this video right now. We've only covered 2 of the most important aspects of wealth so far, your family and also your health. In the next video, we'll talk about the other 2 aspects of your wealth, your material well-being and also your spiritual well-being. Alright guys, if you have any questions on this video, put them in the comment section below. Thanks a lot.